The Trumpet Daily is presented by Stephen Flurry. The program analyzes world news and history from a distinct perspective and compares current events to prophecies found in the Bible. The program also offers free educational publications, including the Trumpet News Magazine and books and booklets. The Trumpet Daily is produced at the Philadelphia Church of God's home campus in Edmond, Oklahoma, and its sister campus in Edstone, England. More information is available at thetrumpet.com.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Should the supreme leader in Iran be worried right now?
I would say he should be very worried, yeah. He should be. As you know, they're negotiating with us.
I know they are, but the protesters have said, you know, where are the Americans? You promised them we would have their back. Do we still have their back?
Well, we've had their back, and look, that country's a mess right now because of us. We went in, we wiped out their nuclear.
So
if I didn't take out, you know, we have peace in the Middle East.
Yeah.
If I didn't take out their nuclear, think of it. If we didn't take out that nuclear, we wouldn't have peace in the Middle East because the Arab countries could have never done that. They were very, very afraid of Iran. They're not afraid of Iran anymore. We wiped out those beautiful B-2 bombers, one's right over there, those beautiful little model. Those beautiful B-2 bombers went in and they hit their target, every single bomb, and obliterated it. And because of that, they were going to have a nuclear weapon within 1 month.
Yeah.
Within 1 month, they were going to have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
That was a big threat. That they're not going to have it anymore.
But if we obliterate it, what's the deal about? I mean, if there's no more, are they trying to restart the nuclear program?
Well, I heard that they are, and if they do, and I let them know, if they do, we're going to send them right back and do their job again.
So your understanding is they tried to restart it, and that's why you're threatening force?
They tried to go back to the site. They weren't even able to get near it. There was total obliteration. But they were thinking about starting a new site in a different part of the country. We found out about it. I said, you do that, we're going to do very bad things to you.
You can see how confusing this issue is. On one hand, President Trump says, we totally obliterated their nuclear program. But on the other hand, we need to send Steve Witkoff over to negotiate with them. And like the NBC reporter says there, well, if you destroyed the program, why do you need to have these negotiations? I thought it was totally obliterated. Well, they're talking about building it back up. And meanwhile, you've got, I think it's now 30 to 40,000 people that they're estimating this regime has killed. A lot of Iranians are saying that Trump has been worse for the Iranian citizens than even Obama was. There was the Green Revolution there in 2009 where Obama basically triggered all of these uprisings throughout the Middle East and said he would back the protesters against the dictators, ends up only removing the dictators who were allied with the United States, but then wouldn't back up the people in Iran. And now President Trump, I think the amount of people, if those estimates are right, that's far more than were killed by the Iranian regime during the Obama and Biden years. There's video footage of protesters being run over by armored trucks. And here President Trump talking very tough about solving this issue, has shown that he will take some action. But again, this is the big conference tomorrow, sending Witkoff over there. And meanwhile, you've got Iran still pushing against the United States. And these leaders there, we've talked about it for decades at the Trumpet, they are basically just a suicide cult. They want to bring in World War III. And the Iran, I think it was, well, I'll just read this from the Jerusalem Post. It says, U.S. seeks to prevent further Iranian harassment of ships in the Gulf. There was an Iranian tanker ship that came through the Gulf and was surrounded by the Iranian Navy. This article says a U.S. tanker was able to prevent itself from being hijacked by Iranian fast boats, and a U.S. warplane shot down an Iranian drone that was apparently shadowing the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. So again, this is Iran. This is the king of the South, radical Islam, headed up in Iran, and they push at the United States. We'll see what President Trump does coming out of this negotiation on Friday. But again, it doesn't seem like he may do very much. A lot of people think they are prepping to carry out these strikes. But it's a big deal to go in there in Iran. There's millions of loyalists to Khomeini. There's a lot of loyalists to Khomeini in the West. Mr. Fleury played those clips of Iranians or people in Britain who are pledging their allegiance to this radical Islamist regime in the West. What I wanted to get into just a little bit, we're going to play part 2 of the interview that we had with Gadi Taub for the rest of this program. So I just have a few minutes with you. Welcome, by the way, to the Trumpet Daily. I'm Sam Livingston. Thank you for joining us on today's show. If you have feedback for the program, you can send that to td@thetrumpet.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on Rumble and on YouTube as well. In these few minutes, I wanted to talk about how there is this temporary resurgence, and President Trump can appear like he's solving some issues, but these are Band-Aids on problems that aren't fundamentally being solved. And this issue of crime is another one of these where it looks like there's a lot of success. In Memphis, President Trump deployed the National Guard there. Memphis Police Department has reported for the year 2025, the city saw a 27% decrease in overall Part 1 crimes, a 26% decrease in murders, a 48% decrease in carjackings. A lot of success stories because President Trump has restored law and order. But you look at these places and it's hard to believe the solution is that we have to have armed troops patrolling the street corners. That's what you should do. You've got to crack down. You've got to enforce the law. But look at the rot that is within this nation. And like I'll get to Mr. Fleury's article from a couple issues ago in the Trumpet, false religion promises a solution, but in many ways is the cause of so many of these problems. And these problems are not fundamentally being solved. Washington Post reports Washington, D.C. went 3 weeks in 2026 without a homicide as violent crime drops. I mean, it's a tremendous stat for the city. And you look at the chart, and it's not just a result of the pandemic lockdowns like they blamed for everything. It's January 2025, before President Trump was there, to January 2026, and it's less than half. Time magazine reports why crime rates are falling across the United States. Crime rates are dropping across the U.S., in some cases reaching their lowest levels in decades. And they go through a lot of these cities and talk about how law is being enforced. In more cases, these judges are going to be held accountable for releasing violent criminals back on the streets, getting the gang members, arresting them and deporting them, the Tren de Aragua members. There's a lot of success, a lot of things where people would view this as going in the right direction. There's the immigration crackdown. But then you look at how easy it is to get President Trump to kind of flip on this issue when you look at a place like Minneapolis. He had an interview with NBC where he was talking about, well, we don't really want to be going into these places where we're not invited in. So basically, federal law, we're only going to enforce it in the places where mayors are nice to us. This is, again, a segment from his interview. just yesterday with NBC, clip 2.
So I want to be clear, because it sounds like there is a shift in immigration enforcement here, that there's going to be a shift after Minneapolis. What should Americans expect going forward?
Well, one thing I say to my people, you know, we do a good job, we don't get credit for it. I say they have to ask and they have to say please. When a city is
who
going
has to ask and who has to say please?
The mayor or the governor, I don't want to go and force ourselves into a city, even if their numbers are terrible. Like, for instance, I got a call from Jeff Landry, governor of Louisiana. He said, we have a big problem. Could you go in and help us with well, let's see, certain sections. I mean, to be honest with you, certain sections of the state, beyond their famous, beautiful city, certain sections of the state. We have done, not only in New Orleans, we've done a really great job in Louisiana, but I was called. I want to be called. Chicago, we could solve the Chicago crime.
Well, on that question, which cities are you headed to next?
We have 5 cities that we're looking at very strongly, but we want to be invited. We will sometimes call the governors and
are
say,
these cities like Chicago, Philadelphia? Are these the cities?
We could straighten out the crime in Chicago. We've already brought it down 25% just by being there. We could have Chicago be a safe city, just like D.C. is a safe city, just like all of these places that we've gone to. And I look forward. You know, I didn't campaign on that. I campaigned on law and order, but I didn't think I'd be going into individual cities and making them safe.
He did campaign on that. And it shows how wishy-washy politics can be. He wants to please everybody, but the takeaway here is that the mob got its way in Minneapolis. And ironically, they're setting up these autonomous zones where you have to show ID to get into them so that they know who is in their neighborhood. It's laughable. Exactly what they're protesting. But this mob won in Minneapolis. President Trump is backing down. We want to be called in. We want to be invited in. So basically, the sanctuary cities are victorious. Federal law doesn't apply to them unless they ask for it. And President Trump, he'll say one thing to the media, but then over on Twitter or Truth or whatever he's using, he says a totally different thing to appeal to the base. That's the way of man. And it's not going to solve our problems. NBC says Trump administration to withdraw 700 immigration agents from Minnesota. Tom Homan says, my goal with the support of President Trump is to achieve a complete drawdown and end this surge, talking about in Minneapolis, as soon as we can. The mob got its way. Now their excuse is, well, now the state and local officials are working with us and they're handing over the illegal criminals to us so that we can take care of them. But again, this isn't going after all of the illegal aliens. This is just going after the criminals, assuming that those local officials will even work with them. The mob won. You see the same thing with voter ID laws. Everybody's in favor of it, but there are people in charge in the United States who hate the United States. That's what's happening in Minnesota, and it's lawless. President Trump isn't solving these problems. Maybe these are Band-Aids. Maybe these are things that kick the can down the road, that there's that brief resurgence so that America has more time to repent. But at its core, these fundamental problems aren't being solved. President Trump spoke at the prayer breakfast this morning. I'm sure we'll have a lot more quotes and clips and details from this, but I wanted to play just a couple for you before we end this segment. This first one, he's talking about just how much help he needs from God. We've talked about lately how he just talks only about himself. There was the July 13th moment of humility, but then it's basically I'm doing all of this. But now he's back in front of the religious leaders, and notice what he says here. This is clip 3.
And last time I came, I got in at 4 in the morning. They said, sir, you're going to be speaking at 7. They said, really? Oh, that's wonderful. I said, where? National Prayer Breakfast. I said, I'll be there. I'm afraid not to be. I need all the help I can get. And, you know, I never get a fair break from the fake news, which is back there. That's a lot of fake news. because last time I was having a lot of fun. We had a big crowd. We had 60,000 people, and I'm talking about the fact that I will never make it to heaven. I will never, ever. And I was being funny. I was trying to be, you can't be sarcastic with them because they write your words, and they don't. The people who are reading the words are much different than the. But I said, I'm never going to make it to heaven. I just don't think I qualify. I don't think there's a thing I can do, but all of these good things I'm doing, including for religion, religion's back now hotter than ever before. I mean, I have to tell you. But I said, even though I did that and so many other things, I named things, I said, I won't qualify. I'm not going to make it to heaven. And the New York Times did a front page story that Donald Trump is questioning his life and the meaning of his life. No, I was just having fun. I really think I probably should make it. I mean, I'm not a perfect candidate, but I did a lot of good for perfect people. That's for sure. Right, Mr. Speaker?
You can see how shallow it is. Him talking about religion is back hotter than ever before. He has this office of faith, and those are essentially political advisors, as we've covered on this show. Well, you got to get back to talking about God. You don't want to lose them. Here's just one more clip from that prayer breakfast, clip 4.
To be a great nation, however, I think, and I may be wrong, but I don't think so, because I've watched a lot and I study a lot. You have to have religion. You have to have it. You have to have faith. You have to have God. And thankfully, as we gather today, there are many signs that religion is coming back, and now it's no longer signs. It's just coming back. It's coming back so strong.
Religion is coming back. It's amazing to go back to church literature, 2015, 2016, read what Mr. Gerald Fleury was saying about King Jeroboam and Amos 7. This article, I'll just conclude with this. I'm a couple minutes over. Incredible article. Read it, review it if you haven't. It's from a couple issues ago in the Trumpet by Mr. Gerald Fleury. America at the Crossroads. President Trump spoke at Kirk's memorial, but he didn't say much about religion. He has spent his entire life relying on his own abilities. Even amid these terrible curses, this has not changed. Yet he also sees that people yearn for religion. That is why he gathers religious leaders around him. It's political. He uses them for what he can get out of them. And in that article, Mr. Fleury talks about how false religion being hot, America being more religious than ever, often is bringing more problems. It's the cause of these problems, false religion, not knowing the truth. Mr. Fleury says, we need a leader who will lead our people to embrace the living God, not a puny, helpless man. And then he goes on and quotes some more from some past statements that President Trump has made. That article is how you understand where America is at right now. It's titled America at the Crossroads. How do you react to this religious resurgence? Is it really going to solve America's problems like President Trump said there? You have to have religion. Well, what is that? What does that mean? What does that entail? Again, Mr. Fleury covers that in that article, America at the Crossroads. Read that if you haven't. Subscribed to the Trumpet magazine. It's free, sent to your door for free once every month. Again, follow us. Subscribe to the Trumpet Daily. Email your comments, td@thetrumpet.com. For the remainder of this show, we'll play the part 2 from Mr. Stephen Fleury's interview with Gadi Taub. This will take you to the end of the program, and there's even more content to follow in the coming shows. So stay tuned for that, and we can go ahead and transition right into part 2 of Mr. Fleury's interview with Gadi Taub.
So you've been able to see the campus and spend time with students, gave a wonderful assembly to them. What are your impressions on your visit to Edmond, Oklahoma?
Exhilarating. It's a sense of community. It reminded me the best, most satisfying job I ever did was not a job. I used to do children's TV. And then one afternoon a week, I went to a home for youth in I don't know how you call it in America, in need or in distress. And there I felt that we're helping people build a community, and the kids here are obviously healthy and in their right mind, but you're building a community from scratch, and it's exhilarating. You feel it in the air. People.
Yeah. There's a real positive spirit, and you talked about how attentive they were during your assembly, and that's just the way they are. They're eager to learn, and they love having special guests and love to ask questions. So that's a great...
and they're alert. As you know, you speak to crowds a lot too. You sense immediately if the crowd is attentive and intelligent or not, and then you're energized as a speaker too if you see that people are engaged.
Do you get that a fair bit? I mean, you're a teacher too at Hebrew University. I mean, I don't want you to put down your students or anything, but it is different from one lecture to the next. And what generally do you get in terms of reaction?
It's different from one class to the next. Some classes are. It depends if they come to class, if it's elective or obligatory, and some classes are just downers.
Yeah.
And then you become boring yourself. The energy just falls down. But here there's something regenerative. You feel, I don't know, it's inspiring.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, I wasn't there, I wish I would have been there, but when you drove through campus this morning, you had some of the young children from the academy that were out there to cheer you on and to wave flags.
Yeah, that was... I felt like a celebrity. And I also thought about the natural friendship between Israel and many good Americans.
Yeah.
And I think that this alliance is something fundamental, not something transitional.
Yeah.
And in this increasingly hostile world to Jews, it's very important to come and breathe some friendly air.
Yeah, well, we consider Israel to be a dear friend. We actually have a booklet. Herbert Armstrong was the one who preceded us. He died in 1986, and we've followed in his steps religiously. And we have a booklet or a brochure that's called A Warm Friend of Israel, and he, back in the day, he was seen, arm in arm with Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem.
The legendary mayor.
Yeah, the legendary mayor. And he knew a lot of the prime ministers and met with them. So, and then I mentioned over lunch that we have a lot of students participate in excavations there at the Ophel in the city of David. So we definitely, and we have an institute over there. And I was telling you about the dance program that performed there last summer. So we definitely probably do more in Israel than besides America. We probably do more in Israel than any other nation. So,
and also, I think that the younger generation everywhere, and it's probably more so in this college because it's a self-selected crowd. But generally, if I look at my students, the younger ones are less inclined to be woke. They're fed up with this fake moralism and sense of moral superiority based on nothing at all, and all these this grandstanding and self-righteousness, which leads you to completely ridiculous moral choices. And I think the younger people are more serious. And I thought it's an Israeli thing because we have a very strong reality check. You can romanticize the other and the indigenous people of color in Palestine, but when they come and burn a family alive, that's a serious wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
I heard our chief pathologist, he's the chief of the Forensic Medicine Institute, which works with the police. And these people work with horrors all the time, and he's very scientific and proper. And he was interviewed, and then he explained how you know that someone was burned alive. He said, because the inside of your breathing apparatus is also burned. It means you inhaled fire. And he was talking about this scientifically, and suddenly he broke down and cried. Mm-hmm. And this is not a man who cries. He's seen a lot. but suddenly you understand the horrors that we are facing, and you realize that what Benjamin Netanyahu has said to Congress, that this is not a clash of civilizations. This is a clash between civilization and barbarism. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are engaged in a global intellectual war in which, once again, Zionism is the litmus test. Mm-hmm. Between the woke and the radical jihadist on the one hand, and the Judeo-Christian Western tradition on the other. And one version of the world interprets Zionism as the rearguard action of a retrograde, bad old colonial attitude to the world, as opposed to progressives who now accept Islam and all that. And the other interpretation says, no, Zionism is not the rearguard action of the bad old world. It is the spearhead, the front in the war of civilization against barbarism. And so the way you look at the war in Gaza actually can be extrapolated to a whole worldview, which asks, are you continuing the Judeo-Christian tradition, or are you seeing it as something that needs to be replaced? And the fault line, it's once again is your attitude to the Jews.
Yeah. So do you, in this struggle, civilization against barbarism, I've picked up some statements you've made, and you seem pretty optimistic about Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership, President Trump, and just some of the victories in the past 2 years since October 7. But that said, you've also talked about the radical Islamist infiltration into Europe, and so in that sense, it's spreading. Where do you see in this struggle? Radical Islam is expanding and growing in many respects too. Is that right?
Yeah, and the question is, when are we going to wake up? It can be, I think that early is better than late, because first of all, I don't trust Europe, and its waking up can be extremely violent. We don't want to see a version of Nazism turn on Muslims. That's not the cure. So we don't want to see, God forbid, extermination or a genocidal war on Islam. The radical forms, the jihadi Islam, the attempt to take over Europe should be stopped, and Europe should be clear in saying, if you want to live in these countries, in our countries, you need to respect our majorities. What happened? Our tradition, our rules, our laws, and our customs. So if you are going to treat women like property, you're not allowed to do that here. And we're not going to accept it in the name of tolerance or multiculturalism. And if Europe does that, then possibly it can still be saved. And also, immigrants who are committing crimes should be deported, and the welfare systems should not support people who are eligible for work and able-bodied and refuse to do it. And a lot of immigrants, you see them showing off that they are that they're not just enemies of the West, but they're going to exploit it and contribute nothing to it. So you shouldn't allow these attitudes. Some places, I think, are unable to wake up at all, because it's like their wokeness is like an autoimmune disease. It's in the name of tolerance, you accept people who pride themselves on wanting to kill you, and you are somehow, it makes you somehow feel that you are morally superior, that you're not waking up and resisting, and that your immune system is not alarmed by all this. Some places, I think, are beyond redemption. And again, the canary in the coal mine is the ability of Jews to live peacefully there. If you go to Malmö in Sweden, there's no dignify Jewish life there. If you go to Paris, I went to a bat mitzvah, daughter of a friend of mine, and there were guards outside the synagogue. And it may be coming to America if America doesn't wake up. Look, there's a memory. It's called the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, I think.
I'm familiar with that, yeah.
They compiled a report about imams in the United States, 95% of which are preaching rabid anti-Semitism. And no one is doing anything about it because it's Islamophobia.
Right.
Because one of my favorite podcasters in English is Andrew McCarthy, who has the McCarthy Report in the National Review. And he was a prosecutor in South New York, I think, and he did counterintelligence, and he was going after terrorists. And he said that Islamophobia is not a phobia. It's a term invented by the Muslim Brotherhood in order to discourage inquiry into Sharia supremacist philosophy. And I think that's true. When Ilhan Omar is calling any critique of the Somali community racist or Islamophobic or whatnot, then what she is doing is she's trying to protect racism, anti-Americanism, and misogyny, hiding behind a multicultural reverence of diversity, and it's all a lie, and it's a cynical lie. And if the United States doesn't wake up, there's a whole generation who's now going to mosques and receiving this poisonous ideology, and it won't be long before, dignified Jewish life would not be possible in New York, something we did not imagine. Yeah. But the combination of Mamdani and CARE, the advocacy group for the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and other organizations, and all this network of mosques is going to turn violence against Jews into something legitimate again. And once this takes root, it's harder to uproot it.
So you going back to what you said about Europe and its response, or what should be its response to this infiltration, not brute force to crush it, but how do you see Europe pushing back? Is it similar to what President Trump's trying to do with securing our southern border and deporting the most violent among the illegals that are here? Or is there some other solution that you see to Europe dealing with this problem?
First of all, don't turn policy into an arena where you redeem your guilty conscience about the European past. Start by that. Stop being apologetic and feeling guilty when you're treating this problem. You do not need to grovel at the feet of anti-Semites in order to prove that you are now making amends for your colonial past. And especially, it's amazing because now anti-Semitism has become a form of making amends for colonialism. Now, if you have a guilty conscience about your colonial past, you'll call Israel a colonialist state, and then you'll bash it. So the old version of anti-Semitism was colonial, and now the anti-colonialism is also a new version of anti-Semitism. So you always find a way to make the Jews your scapegoat. So if you want to treat your guilty conscience, look at your own anti-Semitism, not your own Islamophobia. And we see this with the Germans especially. I think we chatted about this earlier in the morning. That I don't remember the name of the psychiatrist who said that the Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz because we are their guilty conscience forever. And so the temptation to see us as Nazis towards the Palestinians is great because it then justifies everything, right? It goes, oh, we have learned the lesson Nazism, but you have not. And now you are the new Nazis. And one step away is, oh, shame we didn't kill you all because you are the Nazis. So you see, it's a vicious circle in which they cannot rid themselves of the suspicion that somehow they would be, that somehow the Jews are evil. And that's convenient to their conscience, because then they are not, then their sins will be cleansed once again by scapegoating us. So I remember when Sigmar Gabriel, who was for a while the foreign minister of the German state, he came to Israel on International Memorial Day for the Holocaust, and he wanted to meet with B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, two human rights organizations which actually are in the business of demonizing the IDF as you know, racists and Nazis. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said, if you're meeting them, you're not meeting me. And he said, I'll meet them. And Netanyahu boycotted, and he did. But imagine a German minister coming to Israel on Holocaust Memorial Day in order to tell us that we are the new Nazis. And these people, B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, they're liars. The Breaking the Silence is an organization that demonizes the IDF by anonymous testimonies that you can't verify because they're anonymous. Now, allegedly, these are real because they are anonymous, because they can, because the soldiers don't fear reprisals, they'll tell you the truth. In reality, and it's been checked multiple times, they make up stories about the IDF that no one can then check. And that's financed by European and German money. And so the Germans have a whole industry working in Israel in order to show that we are the new Nazis. And that is disgusting. And Israel should be very vehement and vocal about that. And if it was up to me, then Sigmar Gabriel would not have entered the country. If you are going to meet them on Holocaust Memorial Day, then you, the German diplomat, are not entering Israel.
I'm not familiar with that diplomat. How high is he up in the...
He was the foreign minister.
Oh, wow.
So he was a very high official. And that was...
And when was this?
When was it? 2015, maybe?
Okay. What you had talked in the previous program about just the weakness in Europe and it, you know, it's wokeism and all that, globalism. Have you, like, are there any Israeli commentators that are in any way concerned about like a resurgent Germany? I mean, right now they're you know, wanting to rebuild its war machine. The Atlantic had a story on that a couple weeks ago. And they're obviously seeing not just Putin as a threat, but more and more of them are seeing Donald Trump as a threat. So is there any kind of concern in Israel that, you know, given the history, 2 world wars, that Germany, if it got a stronger leader, could become more of a menace?
I don't think so. I don't think Israelis are considered the German army a threat to the state of Israel in any way. I don't think it would work this way, but we do think that, you know, when our alliances now are with the anti-immigration forces in the European right, and that is always a tricky business, because although some of the European right has become supportive of Israel and see the world as Benjamin Netanyahu describes it, as a war between Judeo-Christian, the Judeo-Christian tradition and Western civilization against jihadi barbarism, and so find their alliance with us. There are also those who thinks that who are ultra-nationalist, racist, and hate Jews as much as they hate Muslims. And so our alliances should be with those forces who are going to stand up to Arab and Muslim anti-Semitism with us, not against us. And you know, Israel boycotts some of the what we call the deep right in Europe because some of them have actual neo-Nazis in their ranks. Others have managed to cleanse their own parties. Say the Sweden Democrats, who are pariahs in Sweden itself because they want to limit immigration, because they say the truth about Islamic Jihad, but they have under Yemi Ekasen, they have cleansed their ranks from anti-Semites, and it was, I think, October 9th or something that a delegation of the Sweden Democrats came to Tel Aviv. I remember because it was pouring a torrent of rain, and I drove there on my bike and arrived completely wet at their hotel in the north of Tel Aviv. But they made a point of coming here 2 days after the disaster, after the horrendous massacre, in order to show their friendship. And I think Israel should reach out to those among the sovereigntist European right-wing parties who share our values and who have cut their ties with the anti-Semitic right. Because I was surprised by the rise of anti-Semitism on the American right, because until a few months ago, I would have said that, look, on the right there is anti-Semitism, and there are crazy nuts like Nick Fuentes, but on the left it's institutionalized.
Right.
In a university, in a department of post-colonial studies, being pro-Zionist runs against the methodology, not against some conclusion. You cannot, within their framework of a methodology, you cannot make sense of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any other way than making the Jews the oppressors and the Palestinians the indigenous people who are obviously on the side of right. So this has been institutionalized, and 40 years of Edward Said in university is now bearing its bitter fruits. And we have a whole corrupted elite that thinks about the world and the conflict in terms of a bad West which should make amends, not even amends, which should renounce its own identity in order to make amends. And we are the first to, the demand is that Jews would be the first to renounce their identity and their state. And so these people are hiding behind statements like anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Well, anti-Zionism can be something other than anti-Semitism if in principle you are against nation states and you're a globalist. So if you are against the right of all peoples to self-determination, that's fine. But if you're for the right of self-determination for everyone except the Jews, then that's anti-Semitism. If you're singling out the Jews, then that's anti-Semitism. And lo and behold, every anti-Zionist you'd meet ends up being also an anti-Semite. So the congruence is apparently not accidental.
So you mentioned academia and it's how it's institutionalized these worldviews. You've been a teacher in the university for how many years?
I got my appointment at Hebrew U in 2003.
Okay, so
just
over
when
20 years.
I finished my PhD at Rutgers.
Yeah. What have you noticed just being in it besides, as you say, the agenda to portray Israel as the one who's oppressing and the Palestinians as the victims and so on. But have you noticed over the years any other glaring flaws in modern education?
Yeah. First of all, I have a low opinion of academics. In the university teaches you to advance by conformism. The whole system of peer review rewards conformism. That's one thing. And the second thing is that there are no consequences to radical ideas. You can make fiery speeches and be as radical as you want, and nothing happens, because as Roger Kimball, I think, wrote a book years ago called Tenured Radicals, which should have been a contradiction in terms. You're not a brave revolutionary if you are a tenured academic. So the institution is corrupting in its structure. It doesn't encourage innovation. It doesn't encourage a daring thinking. It encourages stifling conformity, and that's how you advance. When I entered academia, I had a lunch with a professor who was just going into retirement, and I said, there are an awful lot of post-Zionists in our university. And he said, oh no, they're not post-Zionists. I said, what do you mean? I read what they write. He said, you don't understand. They are conformists. They have to publish. In American journals, Edward Said is the Vogue, so they write papers which portray Israel the way Edward Said would. And this is how they advance. And this is how academia works. There is a small core of true believers who are radical progressives. And there is a whole majority of cowards who are just conformists. And as Ben Shapiro said in the Turning Point USA convention, rightly, the problem is not just Tucker Carlson. The problem is the hordes of gutless conformists who are not willing to call him out. So our problem is not just Tucker Carlson, it's moral jellyfish like Megyn Kelly who are just trying to find favor with the audience and have no moral backbone of their own and are just, changing with the wind. And this has always been the case. This is how totalitarian states are created. Not everyone is an evil Stalinist. Most people just keep their head down and don't want to get in trouble themselves, and this is how nobody. This ends up with an atmosphere where nobody can raise the alarm without having their head chopped off.
So you say you're not a big fan, and you told the students earlier you wouldn't recommend they go to the university you went to. But you teach at Hebrew U, and looking at what you've observed, there's not a lot of positives, but besides someone sitting in a lecture that you're giving, that would be edifying. But what else in the academic environment is an actual, like a good thing or a positive thing?
Well, it's a good thing that there is an institution that pays people to think. And it's a price you pay, that most professors are mediocre because most people are mediocre. If I may quote my father again, when I went into academia, he told me the great majority of people are mediocre, and it's no different in academia. And that's true. And you can't expect everybody to be a maverick, but you need to create an environment where a maverick can survive. And it was strange because my tenure committee rejected my candidacy. And I thought that this was because I had just written a novel. And if I understand the way they're thinking, and of course, I'm very prominent in the media. And I went the opposite trajectory than they, because for a professor to be prominent in the media, you have to become an expert, many years, show your expertise. And I started on the media, and then I said, I need more basis for the work I'm trying to do. And then I went and did my PhD, but I kept publishing the whole time, and not in their journals, which they don't like. But because I think it's more important for me to write a book that the public would read than to write an article for a journal for a few specialists.
Right.
So they didn't like me, and the tenure committee voted 6-4 against me. Now, usually 6-4 for you is not enough. for you to pass. You need a greater majority. So I was basically kicked out. But then the university...
this is at Hebrew U.
Yeah, this is at Hebrew U.
Yeah.
But then there was a new president at Hebrew U. And Shlomo Avineri, which is probably our most prominent, now the late Shlomo Avineri, our most prominent political scientist, went to the president and said, what kind of university would you like? Do you want a university of specialized technicians, or do you also want intellectuals who can write a novel? And the new president and the provost made an example of me for the tenure committees. And the tenure committee received a slap, because the higher committee, after your regular tenure committee, it needs to be approved by the university-wide higher committee. And the higher committee voted 8-0 for me. So I was just their battering rod. They wanted to make an example for the lower committees to say, we're not just about specialists. An interesting anecdote, Shlomo Avineri stopped talking to me. You know why? Because I interviewed Steve Bannon.
Oh, no.
I interviewed Steve Bannon for Haaretz, and he lied to me. He said he was a Christian Zionist. We see what kind of an idiot he is now. He wants a Christian state in Jerusalem. That means he doesn't understand what a Jewish state is. A Jewish state is a national state in which the Jewish people exercise their right to self-determination. What would be a Christian state in Jerusalem? Who would be the people that would exercise self-determination in the Christian state? So he's just attempting to undermine Zionism with all this. But when I interviewed him, it was shortly after he was kicked out by Trump. And I read the book about him and Trump by Josh Green, which sort of, if you read that book, you would have guessed that Trump is going to fire him, because you need to be not savvy enough in real world politics in order to go around and say that you are the brain behind your chief. No chief appreciates someone going and saying, I'm the brain behind Trump. And so that's what he did with Josh Green in that book called Devil's Bargain. It was a very scaremongering kind of book. But I thought, we don't know anything about Trumpism. That was 1817. And that was 2017 or 18. And I said, let's see what this guy is about. And I did this interview with him, and it was presented in Haaretz like I was ushered into the den of the devil, and I came back with an interview, which was ridiculous. And he said some interesting things. What I didn't say about him was that he was a racist, because I found no evidence of that. I didn't see anything that had to do with race. And by the way, nothing anti-Semitic back then. But two of my teachers disowned me. One was a partner of mine in editing a literary journal in Tel Aviv, Nissim Calderon, and one was Todd Gitlin, who is a leftist intellectual in America, who taught me a private tutoring class, because I more or less avoided my class at Rutgers because my opinions were not enough in conformity with their political correct standards. So I did private tutoring, which you can do. And I went to Columbia to Todd Gitlin, and it was very interesting because he was president of SDS, of Students for Democratic Society, in the 60s for a brief spell, and a nice guy, by the way, but a leftist who went, there was in The Onion, which used to be funny before it went Trump derangement syndrome, total loss. They had a story that said, liberal dies of outrage fatigue. That was Todd Gitlin in the days of George W. Bush. Imagine what would have happened if he were now alive under Trump. So Todd Gitlin and Nissim Calderon published a bilingual piece in Haaretz, in Hebrew and English, which was entitled, Gadi Taub has no difficult questions for Steve Bannon. By which they mean, I did not scream racist, because he's not. And I consider, my job, I'm a journalist and an intellectual, and my job is not to reprimand Steve Bannon. If I can bring to the audience what this man thinks, and if that says something about the Trump administration, then I'm in, and then I want to do it. And that's how I did it. But Haaretz treated it, they actually had the photographer write a piece on what it felt like to take pictures of Steve Bannon. It's, what are you, children? This is ridiculous. And apparently, and Steve Bannon, you can see now that he's an intellectual lightweight. He didn't do his job in the first Trump administration, which was he could have explicated and explained Trump's policy to the press, which Trump doesn't do. And he could have done it in terms that were intelligible to the American educated classes. And instead, he just wanted to find favor with the liberal press. And we see where he is now.
Yeah. You mentioned that you didn't see or detect any anti-Semitism back when you interviewed him in 2018. And social media showed some clips of Tucker, I think 15, 20 years ago, where it was very strongly pro-Israel, supportive of Israel. And they're not the only ones that have just had a pretty dramatic change in their views.
Yeah.
What do you feel like? I mean, these are men that are beyond the academy, and they're in their professional careers, they're in their middle age years, they're in their 50s or 60s, whatever. How do you explain the change in their thinking on support for Israel, or even borderline or full-on anti-Semitism?
I think that they're not the same. Bannon is a half-baked semi-intellectual who is basically an opportunist. And it was opportune to support Israel at the time that he did the interview, and especially with an Israeli journalist. I read stuff he said in other places. I found nothing to contradict what he told me. And after Trump kicked him, I think they are now fighting for the next generation of MAGA. And an opportunist like Steve Bannon is thinking, well, he can't, Trump is not going to anoint him. He's not going to be handed anything by the current Trump administration. So he's thinking, how do you create for yourself support in the next generation of MAGA by challenging the current leader? It would be difficult now, but would pay off later. This is, to my understanding of what my estimate of Steve Bannon's character and plans, this is what he's doing. As for Tucker Carlson, as we chatted earlier before the program, I think you're right that that the interpretation which I held in the beginning, that it's about isolationism, and the way to promote isolationism is to say that an interventionist foreign policy it means you're being controlled or dragged by Israel into wars that we don't need. It's an easy way to explain to your public why America is making a mistake when it goes to these wars. And I thought that isolationism was the goal and anti-Semitism was the means. I also had a conversation with James Lindsay, who wrote Cynical Theories and whom I admire. He's a great guy and a great critic of wokeness. And also I think he coined the term the woke right. And this was the explanation back then. But I think you're right, Stephen, that now this anti-Semitism is so obsessive that it no longer seems like something instrumental alone. And it's driving him away further and further from the original America First philosophy. Because if you end up supporting America's enemies, so how is this America First? How is supporting Iran, who chants death to America, how is that America First? And I think that this is just another manifestation of what I've been talking about to your students, that once you cross the line into anti-Semitism, you end up with anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism, and undermining the Judeo-Christian tradition. And now I hear Tucker Carlson bad-mouthing the Old Testament. How surprising is that? That you start with anti-Semitism and you undermine the basic text which you and I and your students and the whole of the West, the whole of the Christian and Jewish West share as the foundational text of our civilization. So you start by dabbling in anti-Semitism and you drift away from the foundations of your own civilization.
It's a slippery slope, for sure.
Yeah.